The fastest way to lose a company is to ignore the quietest person in the room. No one inside the executive boardroom believed those words until it was almost too late. The 32nd floor of Horizon Dynamics overlooked the Chicago skyline through walls of polished glass, where storm clouds gathered above the city like a warning no one wanted to acknowledge. Inside the conference room, executives sat around a massive walnut table surrounded by glowing financial reports, engineering diagrams, and live system alerts flashing across enormous digital screens. Millions of dollars in contracts hung in the balance as the company's most important infrastructure platform continued to fail. Every passing minute pushed another client closer to canceling a long-term agreement. At the head of the table stood Claire Morgan, the respected chief executive officer whose reputation had been built on confidence, precision, and decisive leadership. She studied the alarming data before turning toward the engineering department with growing frustration. "Does anyone in this room actually have a solution?" she asked. Silence answered her question. Several senior engineers exchanged uncertain glances before lowering their eyes. Consultants from two nationally recognized technology firms had already exhausted every recommendation without success. The crisis continued spreading through the company's network faster than anyone expected. Then a calm voice quietly broke the silence. "I believe I know where the failure began." Every head turned toward Nathan Brooks, a 43-year-old single father and systems engineer who had spent years quietly solving technical problems that rarely attracted attention. Wearing a simple blue work shirt beneath a worn navy jacket, he looked completely out of place among expensive tailored suits and executive titles. Nathan gently placed a folder on the conference table. "If the engineering logs are reviewed in chronological order instead of by department, I believe the root cause will become clear." Claire looked at him for only a moment before her expression hardened. "Mr. Brooks," she replied, "this discussion is being handled by senior leadership and outside specialists. We do not have time for theories from someone who is not directing this project." The room became painfully quiet. A few executives politely avoided looking at Nathan, while others exchanged uncomfortable expressions. Claire continued without raising her voice. "Please leave the strategy meeting. We need experienced decision-makers focused on practical solutions." Nathan slowly picked up his folder without showing anger or embarrassment. "Yes, ma'am," he answered respectfully. "I truly hope the company succeeds." Without another word, he walked toward the conference room door. Behind him, the meeting immediately resumed as though nothing important had happened. The heavy door closed softly, leaving Nathan alone in the quiet hallway overlooking the city below. He stood for a moment beside the tall windows, watching rain begin to fall across downtown Chicago. Inside the folder resting beneath his arm were months of engineering reports, system analyses, and documented warnings that he had carefully prepared long before the crisis reached the executive floor. He had submitted every recommendation through proper channels, never demanding recognition, never seeking promotion, and never expecting applause. He believed responsibility meant doing the right thing whether anyone noticed or not. Back inside the boardroom, another emergency notification suddenly appeared across every screen. A major client had suspended operations after another critical system failure. The room that had dismissed the quiet engineer only moments earlier fell completely silent, unaware that the man walking calmly toward the elevator carried the one solution capable of preventing the greatest financial crisis Horizon Dynamics had ever faced. Nathan Brooks stepped out of the elevator into the cold Chicago rain, carrying the same worn leather folder that no one inside the executive boardroom had bothered to open. He walked across the parking garage without looking back at the towering headquarters of Horizon Dynamics. The humiliation he had experienced only minutes earlier still echoed in his memory, yet his expression never changed. He did not replay the chief executive officer's words with resentment. He simply unlocked his aging pickup truck, placed the folder carefully on the passenger seat, and began the familiar drive toward the suburban neighborhood where someone far more important than any executive title was waiting for him. Every afternoon followed the same quiet routine. He arrived outside Lincoln Elementary School a few minutes before dismissal, where children poured through the front doors laughing, waving backpacks, and searching for familiar faces. A bright smile appeared on 12-year-old Lily Brooks as soon as she spotted her father waiting beside the truck. She climbed inside, fastening her seatbelt before asking the question she asked almost every day. "How was work today, Dad?" Nathan smiled gently before starting the engine. "Busy," he answered, "but I made it home in time to hear about your day." Lily happily began describing her science class, an upcoming history project, and the drawing she had completed during art period. Nathan listened carefully, asking questions and celebrating every small accomplishment with genuine interest. By the time they reached their modest brick home, the disappointment from the morning meeting had already faded beneath the simple joy of being a father. After dinner, they washed the dishes together, finished homework around the kitchen table, and laughed over a puzzle that refused to come together on the first attempt. When Lily finally headed upstairs for the night, she paused halfway up the staircase. "Dad," she called softly, "you always tell me that doing the right thing matters even when nobody notices." Nathan looked up and smiled. "That is still true. Did someone notice today?" she asked innocently. He paused only briefly before answering. "Not yet." Lily nodded as though that answer made perfect sense before wishing him good night. Once the house became quiet, Nathan carried his folder into the converted garage behind the home. The space looked nothing like the executive conference room he had left earlier that day. Instead of polished glass walls and expensive furniture, there were shelves lined with engineering manuals, circuit boards, measuring equipment, notebooks filled with handwritten calculations, and a large whiteboard covered with carefully organized system diagrams. A single desk lamp illuminated the room while rain tapped gently against the windows. Nathan opened the folder and spread dozens of engineering reports across the workbench. Every document had been dated, indexed, and cross-referenced months before the crisis had reached the executive offices. He quietly compared system logs, traced network activity, and reviewed performance data with patient concentration. He was not trying to prove anyone wrong. He was trying to understand exactly how the failure continued spreading despite every temporary repair. Hours passed unnoticed until one small sequence buried deep inside the historical engineering logs caught his attention. Nathan leaned closer to the monitor, carefully comparing the data with an earlier report he had submitted nearly 6 months before. The numbers aligned perfectly. The same hidden pattern he had warned about was now accelerating through the company's infrastructure exactly as he had predicted. He slowly closed his notebook, looked toward the quiet family home beyond the garage door, and whispered to himself, "It is worse than they realize." Far across the city, inside the brightly lit headquarters of Horizon Dynamics, another emergency alert flashed across every executive screen as yet another major client suspended operations, while the one engineer who fully understood the crisis quietly prepared for a decision that would soon change every life connected to the company. The following morning, Horizon Dynamics looked nothing like the confident company Nathan Brooks had quietly left the previous afternoon. Employees entered the downtown Chicago headquarters beneath an atmosphere of growing uncertainty as emergency meetings replaced ordinary schedules and every hallway conversation centered on the same question. How much worse could the crisis become? Large digital displays inside the operations center flashed continuous warning notifications, while network engineers rushed between workstations searching for answers that continued slipping further out of reach. Overnight, 3 additional corporate clients had suspended critical services after repeated system failures disrupted their operations. Financial analysts estimated that every passing hour placed millions of dollars of future contracts at risk. Inside the executive conference room, Claire Morgan stood before the board of directors as updated reports appeared across the enormous presentation screens. No one interrupted the briefing because the numbers spoke loudly enough on their own. Revenue projections continued falling. Customer confidence continued weakening. Outside consulting firms requested additional time, yet no one could guarantee success. One board member finally broke the silence. "How many solutions remain?" Claire looked toward the senior technology consultants seated beside the engineering directors. None of them answered immediately. Finally, one consultant quietly admitted, "We have eliminated every conventional cause. Something deeper is triggering the failures." The room became silent once again. Across the city, Nathan followed a very different routine. After dropping Lily at school, he stopped at a neighborhood coffee shop before returning to the small garage behind his home. Steam slowly rose from a simple paper cup resting beside his workbench as he reopened the engineering logs he had studied late into the previous evening. He carefully compared archived server records with the newest publicly available system status reports released by Horizon Dynamics. Every sequence confirmed the same conclusion. The company was treating visible symptoms, while the original engineering flaw continued expanding beneath every temporary repair. Nathan quietly opened another notebook filled with handwritten observations dating back more than 6 months. Every page reflected careful preparation rather than frustration. Every recommendation had been documented with dates, testing results, projected outcomes, and practical corrective actions. He remembered submitting each report through the proper channels, believing someone would eventually review the evidence with patience. Instead, the reports had disappeared into layers of corporate bureaucracy while the underlying defect continued growing unnoticed. Nathan closed his eyes briefly before looking once more at the engineering diagrams spread across the table. He knew exactly what needed to be done. He also knew no one had asked for his help. Meanwhile, tension inside Horizon Dynamics continued rising. During another emergency meeting, a senior board member requested access to historical engineering recommendations submitted before the crisis began. Corporate records specialists searched archived project databases, while administrative assistants gathered thousands of technical documents from previous development phases. Hours later, one operations manager entered the conference room carrying several storage boxes filled with archived reports. As employees sorted through months of forgotten engineering files, one particular folder caught the attention of a board member. The cover displayed a familiar name, Nathan Brooks. Attached beneath it rested a series of detailed recommendations submitted long before the system failures became public. Claire quietly accepted the folder and opened the first report. Her expression gradually changed as she continued reading. Every warning described the same technical pattern currently threatening the company. Every recommendation proposed preventive measures that matched the problems now unfolding across Horizon Dynamics. The submission dates revealed an even more uncomfortable truth. Nathan had identified the danger months before anyone else recognized the crisis. The conference room became completely still as another executive slowly whispered, "He tried to tell us." Claire lowered the final page onto the conference table without speaking. For the first time since the crisis began, she realized the quiet engineer she had dismissed had never come seeking recognition. He had come carrying the solution long before the company realized it needed saving. Late that afternoon, the atmosphere inside Horizon Dynamics shifted from confidence to quiet urgency. The board of directors remained gathered around the long conference table while the folder containing Nathan Brooks's engineering reports lay open before them. No one spoke for several moments. Every page revealed another warning that had been submitted months before the crisis reached the executive offices. Every recommendation included testing results, projected risks, and practical corrective actions. Claire Morgan slowly turned another page, stopping each time she recognized her own electronic approval stamp confirming the report had been received before being routed through several management levels where it quietly disappeared. She closed the folder and looked toward the executive vice president. "Find Mr. Brooks," she said calmly. Immediately, there was no hesitation this time. Phone calls began within seconds. Human Resources searched employee records while department managers attempted to contact Nathan. Yet the answer remained the same. He had taken a scheduled vacation day to spend time with his daughter after several exhausting weeks of overtime. Across town, Nathan and Lily wandered through a neighborhood science museum, enjoying an afternoon they had planned long before the company's emergency began. Lily eagerly examined interactive engineering exhibits, while Nathan smiled as she proudly explained how bridges distributed weight across support beams. "You always make complicated things easier to understand," she said. Nathan laughed softly. "That is because every difficult problem becomes smaller when you study it patiently." His phone vibrated several times inside his jacket pocket, but he silenced the calls without checking the screen. Today belonged to Lily. Back at Horizon Dynamics, another emergency meeting had begun. The newest system reports looked even worse than those presented that morning. Additional customers had temporarily suspended critical operations, and financial analysts warned that investor confidence could soon begin declining if stability was not restored quickly. One board member quietly looked toward Claire. If Nathan predicted this months ago, perhaps he also knows how to stop it. Claire remained silent for a moment before answering. I believe he does. The confidence that had once defined her voice had been replaced by something far more important. Humility. She finally reached Nathan through a simple text message instead of another executive order. It read, Mr. Brooks, I owe you an apology. The company needs your help. Please call me when you are available. Nearly an hour later, after Lily happily finished building a small model bridge inside the museum workshop, Nathan glanced at his phone and noticed the missed calls along with Claire's message. He read it twice before quietly placing the phone back into his pocket. Lily noticed his thoughtful expression. Is something wrong? She asked. Nathan smiled reassuringly. Someone at work may need some help. Lily nodded without hesitation. Then you should help them if you can. Nathan looked at his daughter with quiet pride. She had learned the lesson he hoped she would carry throughout her life. Kindness should never depend on how people treated you yesterday. That evening, after taking Lily home and making sure she had everything she needed, Nathan drove toward the downtown skyline, where the lights of Horizon Dynamics still glowed high above the city. When he entered the executive conference room once again, every conversation stopped. Claire slowly stood before the entire board of directors. There was no trace of the dismissive executive who had asked him to leave only one day earlier. She met his eyes with sincere respect before quietly saying, Mr. Brooks, thank you for coming. Before we discuss the system, I need to begin by saying I was wrong. The conference room remained completely silent after Claire Morgan admitted her mistake. Nathan Brooks stood calmly beside the long executive table without showing satisfaction or resentment. He simply nodded respectfully. Thank you, he replied. Now let us focus on saving the system. Those simple words immediately changed the atmosphere inside the room. Every member of the board of directors realized that the quiet engineer standing before them had not returned to prove anyone wrong. He had returned because thousands of employees, customers, and families depended upon the company's recovery. Claire stepped aside and invited Nathan to review the live engineering data displayed across the massive digital screens. Nathan placed his worn leather folder beside the keyboard before carefully studying the incoming system logs. He did not rush. He did not guess. He quietly compared the live information with months of handwritten notes, archived reports, and network diagrams he had prepared long before the crisis began. Several senior engineers gathered behind him, watching every movement with growing curiosity. Nathan finally pointed toward one sequence buried deep within the operating architecture. This is where the problem begins, he explained. Every repair completed during the past week treated the visible failures instead of the original synchronization error. One consultant looked surprised. We checked that module twice. Nathan nodded politely. You checked the current version. The original defect was introduced during an earlier software migration 6 months ago. The temporary repairs accidentally increased the instability because they never addressed the hidden dependency underneath. The room became quiet again. Nathan opened one of his older engineering reports and placed it beside the live system display. Every diagram matched perfectly. Every prediction aligned with the failures now spreading through the company's infrastructure. Claire slowly realized she was looking at the same report she had unknowingly dismissed months earlier. Nathan continued speaking with steady confidence. The solution is not complicated, but it must be completed in the correct sequence. If we isolate 3 network clusters, rebuild the synchronization tables, restore the archived verification protocol, and restart the authentication process in controlled stages, the cascading failures should stop. The lead technology consultant studied the diagrams before quietly saying, that would also explain why every temporary repair made the instability worse. Nathan smiled gently. Exactly. Claire looked around the room. Can we implement his recommendation immediately? No one objected. Within minutes, engineers throughout the operations center began following Nathan's carefully organized recovery plan. Large monitors displayed progress as one network cluster after another stabilized. Warning notifications gradually disappeared. Performance graphs climbed steadily upward. One relieved engineer quietly announced, "The first cluster is fully operational." Moments later, another voice called across the operations center, "The second cluster is stable." A few minutes after that, the final verification completed successfully. The continuous emergency alarms that had echoed throughout headquarters for days suddenly stopped. The silence that followed felt almost unbelievable. Employees looked toward one another before smiling with quiet relief. Across the conference room, a financial analyst entered carrying updated reports. Customer systems are reconnecting, she announced. The suspended accounts are beginning to resume normal operations. Claire slowly lowered her eyes before looking back at Nathan. She finally understood that the greatest strength inside the company had never been hidden behind executive titles or expensive consulting contracts. It had quietly belonged to the humble single father who never stopped preparing, never stopped caring, and never allowed personal pride to become more important than doing what was right. Morning sunlight filled the headquarters of Horizon Dynamics in a way no one had noticed for days. The constant emergency alarms had disappeared, replaced by the steady rhythm of normal operations returning throughout the building. Engineers monitored their screens with cautious optimism as system performance continued improving minute by minute. Customer support representatives who had spent sleepless nights answering urgent calls now smiled as they confirmed that critical services were fully operational again. One after another, suspended corporate clients resumed their contracts, and updated financial projections reflected something that had seemed impossible only 24 hours earlier. The company had avoided losses that analysts estimated could have reached hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet Nathan Brooks behaved exactly as he always had. While executives celebrated around the conference room, he quietly organized his engineering notes, closed his worn leather folder, and thanked every member of the technical team who had helped implement the recovery plan. He accepted no personal praise and claimed no individual victory. This was a team effort, he said with a calm smile. Everyone here worked hard to restore the system. Several younger engineers exchanged surprised glances. They had expected someone with Nathan's knowledge to enjoy the attention after saving the company. Instead, he spent nearly an hour explaining every step of the repair process so the entire department could understand not only what had happened, but also how to prevent similar failures in the future. Claire Morgan watched from across the operations center without interrupting. She noticed something she had completely overlooked before the crisis. Nathan never spoke to impress people. He spoke to help them succeed. That difference explained why employees listened so carefully whenever he offered guidance. Later that afternoon, the board of directors gathered once more inside the executive conference room. This time the atmosphere was entirely different. Financial reports showed stabilizing revenue, customer confidence was returning, and investors had responded positively after learning the technical emergency had been resolved. The chairman looked around the table before speaking. We owe today's outcome to one individual who placed responsibility above recognition. Claire slowly stood. I agree, she replied. But I believe we owe him more than gratitude. We owe him an honest acknowledgement of our mistake. No one disagreed. Every executive remembered the meeting where Nathan had quietly offered help before being dismissed. Every director had now read the engineering reports he submitted months earlier. Those documents revealed not only technical brilliance, but also remarkable patience. Nathan had never complained after his recommendations were ignored. He had continued documenting the truth because he believed protecting the company mattered more than protecting his pride. Claire requested that Nathan return to the conference room before leaving for the evening. When he entered, every member of the board rose from their chair without being asked. Nathan looked genuinely surprised. The chairman stepped forward and extended his hand. Mr. Brooks, he said warmly, today you protected this company, the livelihoods of thousands of employees, and the trust of our customers. More importantly, you reminded all of us what real leadership looks like. Nathan accepted the handshake with quiet humility. I appreciate your kindness, he answered. I only did the job I believed was right. Claire then spoke with sincere emotion. You saved far more than our systems. You saved our opportunity to become the kind of company that truly listens. Nathan simply nodded. Then make certain the next engineer who raises a concern never has to wait for a crisis before someone pays attention. The room became completely silent. Every executive understood that those simple words carried a lesson worth more than any financial report. As Nathan quietly walked toward the elevator carrying the same worn leather folder he had brought into the building, no one saw an ordinary engineer anymore. They saw a man whose quiet integrity had restored not only a failing system, but the character of an entire company. 2 days later, Every employee at Horizon Dynamics received an unexpected invitation to a company-wide meeting in the main auditorium. Rumors spread quickly through every department as engineers, project managers, executives, and administrative staff quietly filled the seats beneath the bright stage lights. No one knew exactly why the board of directors had requested the gathering, but everyone sensed it involved more than the successful recovery of the company's systems. Nathan Brooks arrived wearing the same simple blue work shirt beneath his familiar navy jacket, carrying nothing except his worn leather folder. He quietly chose a seat near the back of the room, hoping to listen before returning to his ordinary responsibilities. Across the auditorium, Claire Morgan stepped onto the stage. The confident executive who had once commanded every meeting with absolute certainty now paused for several moments before speaking. She looked across the hundreds of employees gathered before her and then toward Nathan. "Today is not about celebrating a financial recovery," she began. "It is about recognizing a failure in leadership that began long before our technical crisis." The room became completely silent. Claire continued with calm sincerity. "Several months ago, one engineer repeatedly submitted detailed reports warning us about weaknesses inside our infrastructure. Those reports were accurate. They were thoughtful. They were responsible. Yet they were never given the attention they deserved." She slowly turned toward Nathan. "When that same engineer tried to help during our most difficult moment, I judged him by his position instead of his character. I publicly dismissed him when I should have listened." No one moved. The silence throughout the auditorium felt deeper than applause ever could. Claire stepped down from the stage and walked directly toward Nathan. Standing before him, she spoke clearly enough for every employee to hear. "Mr. Brooks, I owe you an apology in front of every person who witnessed my mistake. I underestimated your ability, your professionalism, and your integrity. More importantly, I failed to recognize the quiet leadership you demonstrated long before our crisis began. I am truly sorry." Hundreds of employees watched without making a sound. Nathan slowly stood. His expression remained peaceful, free from pride or satisfaction. "Thank you, Ms. Morgan," he answered gently. "I accept your apology." Claire looked relieved, but Nathan continued speaking before returning to his seat. "I also hope we all remember something important. Every organization has people whose voices are easy to overlook. Sometimes the quietest person carries the solution everyone else has been searching for. We become stronger when we listen before we judge." His words settled across the auditorium with remarkable simplicity. No dramatic speech followed. No celebration interrupted the moment. Instead, one employee quietly stood. Then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium rose together in respectful silence. There was no cheering. There were no loud congratulations. Only hundreds of people standing to honor a man who had chosen responsibility over recognition and humility over resentment. Claire quietly wiped away a tear before joining them. She understood that genuine respect could never be demanded through authority. It had to be earned through character. As Nathan looked across the room, he felt no desire for recognition. His thoughts drifted instead to Lily waiting for him at home, eager to tell him about another successful day at school. He smiled softly, knowing the greatest reward was never the standing ovation before him. It was the opportunity to return home and show his daughter that dignity remains strongest when it responds to disrespect with grace, and that true leadership begins the moment a person chooses to help even after being hurt. Several weeks passed, and the changes inside Horizon Dynamics became visible in ways no financial report could fully measure. The company had recovered its stability, but something far more valuable had also returned: trust. Engineers who had once hesitated to share concerns now found open doors instead of closed meetings. Department leaders regularly visited technical teams, asking questions before making decisions rather than after problems appeared. Claire Morgan personally reviewed every critical engineering recommendation before it moved through the organization, determined that no thoughtful voice would ever disappear beneath layers of management again. One afternoon, she invited Nathan Brooks to meet privately in her office overlooking the Chicago skyline. There were no attorneys, no board members, and no reporters waiting outside the glass doors. Only two people whose lives had been permanently changed by one difficult lesson. Claire stood as Nathan entered. "Thank you for coming," she said warmly. Nathan smiled politely. "How can I help?" Claire looked toward the city before answering. When I first met you, I believed leadership meant having the strongest voice in the room. I have learned that leadership often begins by listening to the quietest one. Nathan remained silent, allowing her to continue. I would like you to lead a new engineering mentorship program, she said. Not because you solved our technical crisis, but because you demonstrated the character I hope future leaders will follow. Nathan thought quietly before replying. I will gladly help. If the program teaches people to work together instead of competing for recognition. Claire smiled for the first time without carrying the weight of regret. That is exactly why I hoped you would accept. During the following months, younger engineers gathered around Nathan every Friday afternoon after work. Instead of discussing promotions or titles, he explained the importance of documenting problems honestly, respecting every colleague, and remaining patient even when good ideas were overlooked. He often reminded them that engineering was never about proving someone else wrong. It was about protecting the people who depended on their work. Those conversations slowly became part of the company's culture. Employees noticed that meetings became more collaborative. Managers asked more questions before rejecting proposals. New engineers felt comfortable sharing concerns regardless of experience. Claire attended several mentoring sessions without announcing herself. Sitting quietly in the back of the room, she watched Nathan encourage every participant to contribute. He praised thoughtful questions as much as correct answers. He celebrated teamwork more than individual achievement. Leaving one session, Claire realized the company had not simply gained a remarkable engineer. It had discovered the kind of leader whose influence could never be measured by an organizational chart. That evening, Nathan returned home carrying a small box of leftover cookies from the mentoring session. Lily greeted him at the front door with a bright smile and immediately asked about his day. Nathan laughed softly. I spent the afternoon helping young engineers learn from mistakes. Lily tilted her head. Did they listen? Nathan nodded. They listened because they wanted to become better. Lily smiled proudly. Just like you always taught me. Nathan looked around the warm family home, filled with quiet laughter and simple comforts. The recognition he had received inside the company mattered far less than moments like this. True success was never found inside executive offices or conference rooms. It lived in the example a father left behind for his daughter and in the lives quietly. Improved whenever one person chose humility over pride, patience over anger, and service over recognition. 1 year later, Horizon Dynamics had become known throughout the industry not only for reliable technology, but also for a culture built upon listening before judging. New engineers often heard the story of an ordinary employee whose quiet preparation had protected an entire company, although many never realized that the man still walked the same hallways every morning carrying the same worn leather folder and greeting everyone with the same humble smile. Nathan Brooks never requested a larger office, a prestigious title, or public recognition. He remained happiest solving difficult engineering problems alongside his colleagues and returning home each evening in time to pick up Lily after school. Every afternoon, their familiar routine continued. They drove through the peaceful streets of suburban Chicago, talked about homework, shared dinner around the kitchen table, and laughed over small moments that no newspaper would ever report. Nathan believed those ordinary evenings were the greatest success any father could hope to achieve. Claire Morgan also changed in ways that reached far beyond business strategy. Before approving important decisions, she visited engineering teams personally, asked thoughtful questions, and listened carefully to employees whose names she might once have overlooked. The lessons she learned during the company's darkest week became the foundation of her leadership. Respect could never be demanded through authority. It had to be earned through humility. One autumn afternoon, Horizon Dynamics welcomed university engineering students for an educational tour. During the closing session, one student asked Claire what had been the most important decision of her career. She paused before answering. The most important decision was admitting I had been wrong and choosing to listen before it was too late. Across the room, Nathan quietly continued explaining technical diagrams to another group of students without realizing he had just become part of her answer. Later that evening, Lily sat beside her father on the front porch watching the last golden light settle across the neighborhood. She looked up at him and asked, "Dad, do you think people can really change?" Nathan smiled gently before answering, "Yes. Every person can choose a better decision tomorrow than they made yesterday. That is how character grows." Lily rested her head against his shoulder, comforted by the quiet certainty in his voice. Far above the city, the lights inside Horizon Dynamics slowly dimmed as another successful day came to an end. The systems remained stable, the employees worked together with renewed trust, and a company once divided by pride now moved forward with greater wisdom. Yet the greatest victory had never appeared on a balance sheet or inside a quarterly report. It lived inside the hearts of people who learned that kindness is never weakness, preparation is never wasted, and quiet dignity will always outlast loud confidence. The engineer who had once walked away from humiliation carrying only a worn leather folder ultimately repaired far more than a corporate crisis. He restored faith in listening, reminded leaders that every voice deserves respect, and showed his daughter that true greatness is measured not by applause, but by the courage to keep doing what is right even when no one is watching. And in the peaceful silence of that ordinary evening, surrounded by the people whose lives had quietly changed forever, the strongest victory of all needed no celebration because truth, humility, and love had already spoken louder than any title ever could. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.